others just think he was, while they suppose he did. I know he still does, and I'm holding to the promise. Where two or three agree, God's gonna do the same for you and me. They hear the sons and daughters make a wine out of water. He will go and feel off upon the sea. And if you fell a little swell, put the meal in a widow's bell. I'm telling you, God's gonna do the same for you and me. Yeah, I believe he is, while others just think he was, while they suppose he did. I know he still knows, and I'm holding to the promise. Where two or three agree, God's gonna do the same for you and me. I believe he is, while others just think he was, while they suppose he did. I know he still loves, and I'm holding to the promise. Where two or three agree, God's gonna do the same for you and me.
Amen. Attention veterans. If you are a veteran, you have to have a family member who is a veteran, or know somebody who is. This news may be of some interest to you or them. The President of the United States has recently signed into law a bill that affects all veterans. This law states that if a veteran has not registered at a Veterans Affairs hospital since October the 1st, 1996, then on October the 1st, 1998, he or she will lose all medical benefits for life. To make it worse, the VA cannot notify veterans about it. That information must be disseminated by a word of mouth or by letter. We called the local VA office and found out this information is true. They recommended that everyone eligible for benefits come by their office and sign up prior to the October the 1st deadline. Whether or not they have received treatment at a VA hospital since 10/1/96, this way no one will slip through the cracks. You will need to bring your DD 214 to your local VA office, and it will only take about 5 minutes to complete the form. This will maintain your veterans' benefits. If you cannot locate your DD 214, go to the VA office and they can help you obtain a copy. I have to believe, brothers and sisters, we got a system of bureaucrats that's wasted and thrown money away, and now they're trying to create every possible means to discredit, misuse, create an image of themselves. When you think of since World War I, the veterans that have poured their blood out on foreign soil to carry out a conflict that many of your politicians have mastered and have manipulated. But let's forget about that tonight. Now, I want to say this. And I say this in respect to people that hear me say so much about our educative system. I want to say this in respect to the hour we live in. If you're going to be a doctor, please don't go down to the old barn and try to dig up some old stuff like the horse doctors of yesteryears. It won't work. You go to a good medical school and get what you need to fulfill your obligation to mankind. You're going to fly an airplane, get a good enough education that you know, brothers and sisters, when you're off of the ground or when you're on the ground, or any other kind of professional occupation. Get an education that you can fulfill that duty and be an asset and a benefit to the human race that you live around. But when they come down the road trying to teach you some of the other simple things that common sense will always outshine, I have to say, don't poke that stuff down my throat. Because I've seen brothers and sisters through the years gone by, too much what this so-called education has done. A man in New York, a highly educated man, he thought he could make a fortune by buying cattle out west because the market was down. He thought just because the market's down, he can buy them cheap. So he sends a young fellow out there that's book learned to make a contract for feeding lots and to set about buying this. Well, they wind up buying several hundred head of cattle, putting in these feedlots. But this other young fellow, he knew nothing about how much feed will it take. So he goes ahead and buys just what he thought might sustain this number of cattle. But you know, over a few weeks of time, the cattle began to die. And the young fellow couldn't find out why. Well, it all summed up to this. Yes, he bought some food, but he knew nothing about feeding cattle. He did not know it would take about 3 times that much feed that he was feeding them to maintain them and cause them to gain a little weight. Now, brothers and sisters, that thing has been repeated through the years of time, all because somebody wants to try to take his book-learned knowledge and make a fortune out of it. But you're still not going to beat that fellow that's waded the mud, that's poured the feed, that handled the hay, and he grew up knowing, and he did not have to learn it in a big book. He learned it from his old man. Now, these are the things, brothers and sisters, I refuse to give way and trade it off for any degree or blue ribbon. Because I had an uncle that taught right down here in that New Albany High School on Slidden Sand. He taught music. He taught the whole thing. And you know what his philosophy was? He told my dad, he says, Raymond, he says, our educative system is running backwards. He says, when they tell you that you have to have 8 years of grade school, 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, before you can teach the second grade, he says they went too far. He says that's like sticking a 400 cubic inch engine in a small car and then limiting it to 55 miles an hour. Why have all that horsepower? Are you listening to me? We have become the most wasteful nation on the face of this earth. We cannot and we have not utilized our assets at all. Come and go with me to Europe, it's nothing. Whether it's Madrid, Spain, or some old city in France or Germany, you're walking down the street. Look at that big brick building. It shows some age. You come to find out that building is close to 200 years old. Some of them old cathedrals are 400, 500, and 600 years old. We build costly school buildings. We wrap up thousands of dollars in them. And if they're used for 50 years, they become obsolete. They become a waste item. So we replace them with triple the acreage because we've got to put in gymnasiums And all of this other, in Europe they don't waste land that way. They utilize their investment. You'll find it this way in Norway. But you'll find very few buildings in America unless they're classified as antique. You could go to Charleston, South Carolina. Yes, you can find some buildings there that was built between 16 and 1700. They've been classified antique, and because of the heritage of America, in fact, they won't even let them be sold to just anybody. But you go into a lot of our other cities, brothers and sisters, we have become a people that's wasted our assets. And we're going to pay for it every bit. This old 8th grade boy may not be around, but if I am, don't forget, I told you so. Now, I saw something upstairs on the paper. We are a nation that has become so drug infested. And they say they're being able to get more of it under control. They have not. That's a lie. Because when you take it out of the government statistics, which is nothing than propaganda, and you begin to take it, brothers and sisters, to the local city, to the law enforcement and the percentages, the flow of drugs, brothers and sisters, is like a torrential downpour. Where does it come from? Right in the paper. The Caribbean, the big island country of Dominican Republic. One of the first areas that began to be peopled in the discovery of the New World. But when you leave the Caribbean and you go into the South American continent, it's the country of Colombia. These areas have been peopled from Spain, Portugal, and Italy. Our mafia and a lot of our drug paraphernalia, I call them drug peddlers. They've been in the business for centuries. Hundreds of years ago in Europe, in the country of Italy and Sicily, there were certain families that were the known criminals. They were the people, brothers and sisters, that eventually clung to extreme political importance. You may not believe that I've read the history on the old world. But you know what Italy and Rome was made up of? Long before it ever became a power? Far east in the Grecian areas and the regions of Yugoslavia and those countries, outlaws, bandits, the crooks, and we're talking, brothers and sisters, even before the era of Christ. They fled that part of the world, and they fled into the extreme regions of where Rome was at. Rome was not even known of then. And the early beginning of the Roman era was first made up by the descendants of these type of renegades that had escaped the part of what they thought was the civilized part of the world. Now all of this, I'm saying this goes to show, when the Spirit begins to get on mankind, if there's nothing to curb that Spirit will soon embed itself in the personality, into the makeup of that type of people. When you read about the mafia, that thing didn't start 100 years ago. That's only the 20th century name of a game of politics and crookedness and thievery and murders that's went on for hundreds and hundreds of years. They've controlled the societies, the governments, the politics in every area where they've ever existed. So when you take it back to evolution, it goes to show there is a law of evolution. Whether we're talking about the genetics or we're talking about domestic, spiritual, social makeup of mankind. You create an environment, and whatever that environment is, mankind will flow according to that. That's why God absolutely, brothers and sisters, I'm convinced, when He let the New World be discovered, sure there was classes of people that came here. They were not real Christians. We won't say they were spiritual men. But when the era of the pilgrims that was Christians, and those type of peoples began to come by boatloads, they brought a spirit, domestically, socially, and spiritually, that as they established their settlements, these settlements became a place of influence, because they came with an altogether different attitude than what was going on sometimes in the nations they came from. And this is why I have to believe that God gave this nation a birth on the basis that every man and woman was going to be born a Christian. No. But every potential man and woman that would be born with the ability to be exposed to the principles of Christianity, godly, honest, decent living. That's why Jesus said about the church, "You are the light of the world." When we think of them, the history of early American, in our early New England towns, hewed out in the mountains, brothers and sisters, I'm not ashamed of the history of the early American society. When they could build the log cabins in the hills with their dirt floors, hack their water from mountain springs. There wasn't no such a thing as a bank. They usually traded a pig or something else of value. And brother, a society of people lived and flourished. We became a nation. Drugs was out of the picture. Yes, there was a few bootleggers that knew how to make moonshine. But we have to say this: they did not dominate our society and the nation. In those mountain villages, our society could live in peace. We did not have a bunch of powerful bureaucrats dominating how the future of this nation was going to be shaped. But it's very much of a fact right now, as the sun sets on a Sunday afternoon in the month of May 1998, across this land, there's people being killed, mauled, mobbed, abused, killed, raped, sodomites. All the perversion out of hell is now in full swing. Sunset Boulevard is a beehive tonight. What do you think is going to stop it? Only the hand of God. It's got to be destruction. It cannot flourish for another 100, not even 50 years. Because any time you have a society that begins to move into this, there's built within it a self-destructive end. That's why I've said, communism as an ideology of politics and ruling the human race will never thrive much over 100 years, all because it has built-in tendencies of self-destruction. You can start with one generation of people, but by the time they propagate themselves twice, somewhere down the line, there is another spirit begins to move in that begins to cry out and wanting freedom from this oppression. The reason I'm saying these things, brothers and sisters, when I look at that prehistoric planet, no, there was no cities, but I have to believe God had allowed the devil to pervert it to such an extent that this planet was nothing but a hell hole. And there's a God that watches over. And whatever he did it to get rid of this mess of sin and injustice, and to show the devil he was still the master. How many thousands of years this planet hung here, that's none of my business. I'm not even that curious about it. But I am so glad, brothers and sisters, that when the time came, that it says in the book of Genesis, and the Spirit of the Lord moved upon the deep. Now that's not a hole in the ground. That word deep there means translated space. That's good enough to let me know God's looking at the planet. He's going to begin to do something other to bring it back into perspective. He's going to use it. However many thousands of years he took to bring that slowly back into proper relationship, to me, that's just fine. Because when I read my text, behold, the new heavens and the new earth which I will create shall remain. Brothers and sisters, if you live for God, and you and I are allowed to pass into the millennium, to live and rule and reign with him, you're going to see yourself what you have been given power to do in the millennium age. It's going to be your responsibility. It's going to be your insight that God has put in you to help govern an element of human beings on this planet. But it's not to let this thing repeat itself again into an immoral, decayed state. This time, brothers and sisters, 1,000 years, there's going to be nothing but righteousness rule. What will righteousness do? It will create an environment. There is no such a thing, jailhouses. We'll need no police force. You are the police force. That's why he made you kings and priests. And you will rule with a rod of iron. So I'm thankful tonight, brothers and sisters, that there is a future for this planet, and you and I are going to have a process in it. Whenever everything that I have ever read about the Caribbean, I have read how the gangsters, the banditos, the pirates, they came out of Europe. They looked for these faraway sanctuaries where they could hide their boats. And don't think, brothers and sisters, when the treasure boats from Europe, whether they were French or English, out of these cloves of hidden bodies of water come these pirate boats. And brothers and sisters, they engaged these gold-laden ships, and they fought it out sometimes on the high seas, tied against each other. And the number of ships that was sunk carrying gold and treasure from the New World. All because the New World had become a sanctuary where the pirates, the devils, the banditos. See, that kind of history, most people isn't even interested in it. And then 100 or 200 years comes along, and you begin to get a devilish environment. Well, where did this come from? It's been here all along. I want to ask you a simple question. Whatever the drug business is today did not start yesterday. It's been there all the time. Colombia. There's so much of it. You see it in the news. How we send our troops in there to help them countries try to curtail it. What do you think those people was doing before we even got interested? They were growing cocaine and all that stuff and consuming it among themselves. It was a very few brothers and sisters of human society in other nations that would hear about it and be exposed to it. But if so, sooner or later they would make their way to those places. They were sanctuaries where they could go and live like the devil. But I want to ask you, what kind of law enforcement did America have that kept that rotten stuff out of here? One thing sure, they didn't have computer. They did not have the means to run a man's past down. But we kept the rotten stuff out. In Asia, in places like Bangkok, in Thailand, in the early 1800s, in the British colonial era, yes, you had your Asiatic drug lords. In places like Hong Kong, under the British colonial era, there were certain streets that all they had was pot houses. I had a cousin that was in the military, served in that area. And he said you could go a-walking in them parts of town, in them pot houses. If you wanted to be like one of them, you could go in there, and whatever the price was at the desk, you could buy a pipe full of cocaine. They had just old wooden bunks built. You could get up there on that bunk and smoke that cocaine until you passed out. You saw beautiful flowers, then you saw devils. You saw everything that hell has to throw at you. He said, I saw men who were so addicted to it, they were nothing but a corpse laying up there. So addicted that when they ended one pipe, they began to come to themselves, they just bought another and laid there. Hardly ever ate. Many of them never lived to be old age. What kept that stuff out of America at that time? I'm asking a simple question. We had leadership. We had customs officials that knew what they were looking at and looking for, because it carries signs, indications, and they knew, brothers and sisters, how to dig into your luggage. When produce was brought in by the high seas, the dock personnel, do you think there was a bunch of brainless, uneducated men that didn't know what they was unloaded? Some of this stuff, brothers and sisters, was even investigated long before it ever left the dock. Because the principle behind it was, we will not allow that rotten stuff to enter our thresholds. What happened? We are better educated now than they were then. The point is, brothers and sisters, if you have no vision of anything that's right, and you don't have no basic picture what honesty, integrity, what uprightness is, you are a creature that can be sold out to anything and be used. That's why I have to say, brothers and sisters, they will take and drain the treasury of tax money that American people have poured into the coffers, while the honorary politicians behind the scenes betray you and have betrayed our founding fathers and the principle of spirituality, and they've sold your nation right out from under you. They have created the hellholes into the main streets of America's society. And in some of our colleges today, that was well known, respected 70, 80 years ago, where Europeans like to come and get a year's education or 2 years education, because our colleges really were institutions of integrity to give mankind. And back then they were harping everybody needs a better education. Only those that needed one, only those that wanted one came. This is the day, brothers and sisters, they want to run every pig through a college. How to oink. And if time lasts another 50 years, it will be a law to do that. Do you think that's going to make America a better place to live in? Do you need that to be honest? Do you need all of that to know how to be clean? Do you know that? Do you have to know all of that how to be respectable? When you create an environment that's evil-oriented, it produces its kind. Believe me, it does. If the environment that a certain substance or object or something that has been put into, if it is unrelated, it becomes alien. It cannot thrive. You can see that in the plant life. Go to a nursery. Today, brothers and sisters, you can go to most nurseries. There's a lot of types of flower pottings and things. They bring in certain flowers. That's produced a lot in Georgia, Tennessee, and through there. But there's a marginal line of safety. The climate, and a lot of other things have to be taken in detail. They're pretty as long as they're planted in Georgia. They're beautiful when they're planted in Tennessee. And for a little while, they're beautiful here. But after a while, the environment of Indiana and this Ohio River, it takes its toll. Because you come to find out, the environment here will not allow it to grow here and thrive here. If agriculture, if biology, all of these things prove this, well then what do you think, brothers and sisters? Well, human beings begin to create a self-destructive environment. Common sense would tell me something's going to die, something's going to stop existing one of these days. And we're not going to find that beautiful America. God bless America. Land that I love. It's becoming a society. You're disgusted by looking at it. Policemen sitting behind the counters talking about the future. God have mercy. They ain't got a backbone, brothers and sisters, to look a man in the eye and know what they're looking at. Back in the 70s, about 3 or 4 different times we went into Jamaica. Coming out of Jamaica, coming back into Miami, you have to come through the customs. The customs officials was not 21-year-old boys. Most of those men were men that had gray hairs in their temples. Watch them. They've seen them come from the Caribbean, from South America, from all over the world. Through the years of time, they've developed a sense how to study the countenance, the reaction, and the appearance of the spectator, or who they're looking at. Twice, I had one of these old fellows to say to me, not the same guy. The minute I walked up to him, he said, "You're a minister." It was not written on my passport. Was not written on my airplane ticket. I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Are you bringing anything to declare?" I said, "No, sir. I don't drink, I don't smoke, and I don't curse." He smiled. He said, "Open your briefcase." Open my briefcase, put an X on the piece of paper, go on. One time we was going into Bangkok, Thailand. From there we got about 16 teenagers loaded on. And here's where we would come into Calcutta, Indy. When we got off of the plane, was facing down, going into the customs. They were in front of us. About 16 teenagers. Anywhere, we will say, from 16, 17 to about 21. Dirty blue jeans, dirty hair, girls and boys. They smoked. They looked like they came out of a hog pen. You couldn't help but ask, where in the world did they get the money to travel like this? And what are they traveling for? Are they students from some college out to learn something? From the flowers they've got tattooed on their skin to the bags they've got some of their old rags in. They look like a spectacle of human beings that had been living more like animals. The first official came to the desk, an Indian man, but he was not a young man. He was a man at least probably in his late 50s or 60s. All he had to do was look at that, and brother, he started asking questions. Others started demanding, dump it out. Well, here we was standing way back here, hoping they'd hurry up. After a while, another custom agent came in. He looked at this scene, and he looked over and he seen the wife. She seen him first before I did. He went over here to another desk, and he just did his finger like this. We walked up to that desk. He looked at our visas. He asked us a few questions. He asked to see in my briefcase. He okayed us through. I never had to open a suitcase. Now, brothers and sisters, common sense tells me that if you've done your best in life to live by a principle of what's right in your profession, and you do it right, don't tell me, brothers and sisters, you have to go to some stinking book. And whatever character comes along. Now let's see on page 31. Oh, if he's got blue eyes, he's got a mustache. You know what I'm talking about? He's looked at this picture so long. He's studied this. By reality, how you dress tells just exactly what kind of a snake you are. Michael Jackson, that cheating, two-faced singer that's wrapped up thousands of teenagers in the clutches of his effect with his leather clothes. He's a leader for thousands of young teenagers in America. But you come and go with me. Let's go to Canada. Let's go somewhere, brothers and sisters, where the custom officials have to look at this stuff all day long, year in and year out. About 12 years ago, the wife and I had been in Canada, in the eastern part. We was coming back through Montreal, I mean. At Montreal is where we would come to the customs to gain an entrance to the U.S. side. Our luggage is unloaded off of the plane, brought into the customs area to be held by the customs department till we show up at that desk. So he's just standing in the background, waiting until our luggage shows up on the conveyor belt behind them. In front of us is two young boys, nice-looking boys. But you know what? They had on these black leather jackets and all that paraphernalia that shows they are great admirers of Michael Jackson. when their luggage came up, they stepped up to this Canadian man at a desk there, and he says to them, "Is that your luggage?" He said, "Pick it up and set it up here." They did. Then he asked to see their visas, their passports. He asks them a few questions. And then you know what? He says, "Now lay this over on this table." And he says, "Dump it out." I thought to myself, dump it out. Well, they did. Each one had a suitcase, but they had to open it up. They didn't dump it out. They just took it out and laid it out. You look like something you're not supposed to look like. And you're an admirer of that. That tells them custom officials, you can be a two-bit snake. Couldn't trust you out of their sight. The next day he comes up to his desk. Moses says, "Is that your luggage?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Would you mind getting it?" I did. Set it up there. And he looked at me. He says, "What part of the state are you from?" I said, "Down in the southern part of Indiana." He said, "You live on a farm?" I said, "Yes, sir." Some of you might wonder why I more or less dress in a Western attire. To me, brothers and sisters, the Western image is the last image that this planet has ever had. The cowboys of old were not smugglers. I'm going to say something. I said the cowboys of old were not smugglers. They were not drug runners. They were men that made a living, beating the brush, herding a bunch of cattle, eating out the back end of a chuck wagon. And they followed the range of the cattle country. They lived that way. They died that way. Yes, once in a while, you'd have one a drunkard or a bandit. But the majority of the others, brothers and sisters, was as honest as the day is long. And they didn't have to be Christians to be in principle a man of honest integrity. How many understands what I'm talking about? There was a day when I was a boy, if you was guilty of wearing blue jeans like the cowboys, they made fun of you. Because, brothers and sisters, you only wore blue jeans when you were a horseman. Because that's where they were designed, that's for who they were designed for. But it wasn't long, brothers and sisters. Every college kid was wearing blue jeans. And back in the late 60s and the 70s, brothers and sisters, there was foreign students and people coming here buying blue jeans by the suitcase load, taking it back to their part of the world. And today, brothers and sisters, go to anywhere in the world you want to. They're all wearing boots and blue jeans. It's become an emblem, a symbol of the last element of human society on this planet that made an impact on mankind. The church took off his pigtails and his robes. Let me get back to this Canadian man. I thought, will he ask us to unlock our suitcases? There are them two boys, nice. They were as nice a looking men as I ever thought of being. But with them shiny leather jackets, with all of that chromium paraphernalia hanging on. And the haircut just like Michael Jackson, combed just like him. That man asked me a few questions. Go on. I took my suitcase, took it back over and set it on the conveyor, and there it sat. The numbers of time, brothers and sisters, whatever part of the world it is, I've said to myself, if you travel looking right, like a decent human being, They can look at you and read you just for what you are. Back about 5 or 6 years ago when we went to Russia, you know, in your mind you're always thinking, my, this is a place where they will really skin you down. When we went in there that night, it was after dark we got there. When our luggage rushed into this part, and we had to give account what our luggage was, we were asked, are you bringing anything in to declare such you don't like to sell to somebody or to give away? No. Looked at our visas, looked in my briefcase, they checked everything through. This has taught me a lesson, brothers and sisters. It does not matter what kind of a language you speak, what race of people you belong to. There is an old something that God instilled in man. If you watch him long enough, if you deal with him in his everyday life and flow, you learn something that becomes part of you. It's an environment. You can almost tell when you're looking at a crook and you're looking at somebody that could be a drug runner. You don't know the numbers of times there would be nice-looking young people. All of a sudden, they would just pull a suitcase, demand it to be opened. I'm saying these things, brothers and sisters, to show you. You are living now in America that's well over 400 years old as a total nation from its time. But you're seeing a nation, brothers and sisters, that's been sold down the drain by educated politicians who became educated to be crooks. This is what gets me and gouges me. And then young students will go off to college to study to be lawyers. You'll be nothing but a lying crook. No, you won't defend honesty. How many men have studied to be a lawyer? And there's a code in law. And brothers and sisters, when I see the time come when they will not allow a certain evidence to be accepted, and you have to pull out of a sack like a rabbit a bunch of suppositional stuff, and then the judicial system, brothers and sisters, screen you through a process that will drain you of every dime and dollar you've got. I have to say, we are creating an environment that's hell-oriented. When I think of the numbers of people, brothers and sisters, that's been misdone in life, and all because, yes, the Constitution declares you have a right as an American citizen to plead for justice from the court systems. But then when you go there to ask for help, the political process they drag you through. And if you ever do get an end to whatever you went after, you've usually haven't got a dime. Because it took out all of that and more too. I'm going to tell you a little joke. Maybe put a smile on your face. Shortly after I come home out of World War II, I read this in a magazine. We're in a courtroom. There's two men that had been in a bar. They'd been in a fight. The one turns right around and sues the other. There was one man that claimed he was a witness of this fight. They've asked him to take the stand. As he sits there in the seat, the judge looks over at him. And you say you saw this fight? Yes, sir. You were there at the time it took place? Yes, sir. Is these the two men that you saw in the fight? Yes, sir. The judge is trying to twist him up. Did you see this man knock this other one down? Yes, sir. Did you see them rolling on the floor? Yes, sir. Well, did you see this man bite that other man's ear off? No, sir. Well, then the judge, well, what did you see then? I saw him spit it out. Don't that tell you something? You don't need a book to look at that. Common sense. But if they can shake you up and make you look like a crook, a liar, that's their aim. So I'm saying this. There's a judgment day coming. Brother Allen, and we're going to sit on thrones. We're going to judge this bunch of rascals that's twisted and distorted the laws of human beings and made them live like hell down here, that feed this bunch of fat-bellied politicians. Their ego. They've destroyed honesty, respect, dignity. No wonder people have become like they are. All because there is no justice with respect, with honor. You know what? However long God wants this to last like this, that's His business. But I promise you, He who is the judge of it all, and who rules the high courts of heaven, I believe He's got a remedy and a cure for it all. And when He brings this thing to an end, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, the bride of Christ is going to sit on white horses, descending from heaven upon a world that has become so satanic-oriented. Think of the thousands and the millions of people that's been butchered and slaughtered through the centuries of time, all because somewhere there was other human beings in power, driven by an ideology or a devil, to bring human beings into a prison house of a governmental society, brothers and sisters, that's dictatorial oriented. There's a millennium coming. And that millennium is going to last 1,000 years. When God gets through shaking this planet, burying a lot of our cities. I was seeing somebody, I forget where it was at now, and he was saying, well, he says, one of these days, I know the man was from a nominal church. I made something of a remark to him. I said, well, it's evident we're moving in the last days. We're just right at the threshold of the great national disaster. And then he went back to something he said he had read. How that on the East Coast, it's been prophesied that there's a tidal wave 70 feet tall going to come rolling into the East Coast. And will roll inland, he told how many miles. And I just took it away from him. I said, and when it goes back, you know what it's going to sound like? God fleshed his commode. And he laughed. That's what it's going to sound like. It's going to take all that brick and mortar and everything else with it. And thinking of human carcasses is going to flow. It's going to be worse than mudslides in Italy. And brothers and sisters, every time you see one of these disasters like this, just remember, it's a prelude to what that's going to be. These are small-scale disastrous judgment things. But one of these days, it's going to be big. It's going to be of such a horrifying magnitude that people are going to run and scream. Oh, God help me. When you build an environment that evil thrives, it's hard for righteousness to prevail. For it says in the Psalm, I saw the wicked in his day, spreading himself like a big green bay tree. And we see it in America tonight. But then the psalmist asked the question, but have you saw him in his latter estate? He was not. Because the wicked shall be cut off. But the righteous shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace, because the meek shall inherit the earth. Heavenly Father, tonight I pray, take these few words, Lord, and put them together. We know, Lord, day by day, week by week, month by month, we're moving one step forward toward that end of time. And you've warned and said in your word, watch ye therefore and pray that that day come not upon you unaware. Yes, to the world is coming as a thief. But to the children of light, we see it coming. And I pray, Lord, that we can be ready. Lord, it's only by your grace can we stand and live, uphold, and in principle fulfill, Lord, the very things you want us to. Lord, lead us day by day, step by step. Help us, Lord, that whatever we live, whatever we say, will be something that God brings honor to you. Lord, I thank you tonight for my brothers and my sisters. In the blessed name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. Now then, I'm going to say something unrelated to the message.